always pay attention to the lower trunk when you buy a new tree for bonsai. If you don't, you might ruin your tree by repotting in the wrong way. Welcome, this is Jelle, and today we're looking at this nice juniper. It's a Chinese juniper of the variety Blau, and I got it a few years ago when a trader was cleaning out a growing field. I potted up 20 of these in one straight session and I tried to get them in small pots. Now it is time to get this in a bigger pot, and this is an ideal moment to show you what I mean when I say watch out for the roots, look at the lower trunk when you get a new tree and when you start repotting it. Because the common suggestion to just take a saw and cut off the bottom of your pot is a tricky one if you don't know what's in the pot. Before we delve into the pot and look at the roots, let me just have a look at this tree. This is an interesting tree. It has really outgrown this little pot that it is in now. It needs to go into a bigger pot, but it's also so heavy that it just topples over if you just leave it alone. That's also why I had it sitting in this pot, so it doesn't fall over all that easily. But even here, it is not easy. This pot is a very nice heavy ceramic pot. It is not the final pot for this tree, and I'm using a nice ceramic pot as a training pot so it doesn't topple over, and it has lots and lots of space to spread out, because I expect this tree to need another 2, 3, 4 years of growing before it is in the final form. I might at some point have to cut back to one of these side branches, or I might have to work on this trunk to get it more of an interesting shape, because right now it is a little bit straight. Next to this, it doesn't have any branches on this side, so I want to remedy this as well. Which is also why I'm thinking about planting it in a pot actually pretty much like this. That will aid in popping buds here, because I can put this side to the sun. And it will also aid in getting 1 or 2 runners to go vertical while I keep these short. Then I might at some point have to wire these so that they start filling it up, or I need to come up with a completely different design. Now it is important. These design choices are partially dominated by the options that the roots give me. So I need to repot, I need to plant it in a good pot, and I need to look at my nebari before I decide what styling I'm going to make with a tree like this. Now let's take a closer look at the pot, and I can show you why this is important. Come on. I said it is wobbly, right? Now I like this as an example because I potted it up myself, and that's why I know here, what you see here, this is something that you could mistake for a very heavy root. But I know that this is actually part of the trunk, and this is actually part of the original root ball. There are some roots here on the side, and there's a root here which I hope that I can cut off during the repot. And then I can lift the whole thing and try to get this as my surface level nebari. But then of course tilt it all the way up. So let's get this out of the pot, and I'll show you the roots and I'll show you how I pop these up. But before I do, I first need to prepare my pot. Otherwise I have a top heavy tree and no wires and nothing prepared, and I need to get some substrate. Now this pot doesn't have any tie down holes, so the way that I like to deal with that is I take 2 wires, in this case it's 2 millimeters. I want fairly heavy wire, and in the middle I like to twist them together. This way these wires are no longer independent of each other, right? So one end can't move without any of the other 4 moving. So you get a bit more stable connection, and then just as usual you pre-bend at the hole on both sides. Tip it over and you just slide the wires through the mesh. Yes, this pot still had mesh, and be done with it. This is now all set to wire down your tree. There we go. So now I've got 4 ends that are all connected to each other, making it easy to wire in. Now I'm just going to add some substrate, and I'm using my regular substrate that consists of pumice, a bit of lava material and some diatomous earth. And that's what most of my trees grow in, and they grow in quite well. And I'm using fine grained 2-3 mils, so 0.8 of an inch. Just put a little layer in there, and then we're ready to start looking at the tree. Naturally, this tree is tied down with wires in the pot. So I'm going to have to cut it loose before I can take it out. Always check if you can't get a tree out of a pot. Look for wires at the bottom and make sure that you fold the wires open. Then you can quite easily take it out of the pot. Now originally I put a layer of organics in the bottom. And you can see this is completely been decomposed by the worms. This is just garbage. Next to this, what we can see is the roots didn't really like that part either. You see a lot of the roots are in the top layer, which is where the nice aerated substrate is. And in the bottom, there are some roots, but not all that many. The roots that are there are nice and healthy, good growing, healthy root tips. I'm doing this now at the end of summer. Temperatures are dropping, it started to rain, but it's going to be warm enough for the roots to grow for another 4 to 8 weeks. Plenty of time for this tree. Normally you'd recommend doing this in early spring, as the tree just is waking up and gets the first growing tips. This is going to be quite an intense repotting session, because I really want to get this now into the pot in the right angle. That means that I need to look at all the roots. It also means that I'm going to wet the roots in between. This I'm not going to show on camera, I'm just going to now comb it out. And if I see anything interesting, I'll show you. But right now I think it's just a regular gentle combing out, going around and around, as I'm doing right here. Turning every couple of strokes so that you don't pull one root ball apart completely and the other side not at all. All these roots are circling, so you gently need to go around and around, loosening them up so they don't break off. Look, all these long roots, they're still in place, they're just coming loose now. And of course be a little bit careful with the foliage that you don't break it. Well, I suppose. Just have to take it off, right, and then see what roots are actually connected. Or if I can't get it out, I'm just leaving it in the root ball, and the next repotting I can take it out. Aim is not to cause a lot of damage, so leaving it in might actually be an idea. Just going to cut off these mains. There we go. Now, interestingly, if you look at this, here this was all buried, and there's only a few very small roots here. So I can now here of course take all of these on top of. They really have no need to be there. And here at the bottom, there's just this few that have emerged here at the bottom. So I can indeed pot it up at a drastically different angle, because this part only has a few smaller roots connected to it, and the main root ball really sits a lot lower. So all this was buried in the ground, and all of this is part of the actual trunk. So the root ball starts a lot lower than you'd think. And that is the risk if you're repotting without looking at the tree. Ah, there we go. You see? This is the root that I just cut off here on top. It actually has very few side roots. This was already cut, so safe to remove. Good to see. Now I'm not planning on pruning a lot of roots. Not planning on cleaning out the whole core of the root ball, but gently I'm going to tease out a few, and then I might just take, look, these very long runners on there. These I can just take off. It's not a big issue. Then all the inner roots will take over. There's still a lot of field soil. The aim is not to completely bare root, so I'm just removing a little bit, opening it up, and then it's ready for planting up again. Right, the root ball is all cleaned up, and now you can really see how much of a lower trunk there was still hiding. And that directly also gives us an indication that if we take something like this as a front, with nice heavy roots here, we plant it up like this, then this branch can become the whole tree, and everything else could fall away, and I just wire this up in a tight little ball here. Heavy root base, lots and lots of movement. I might at some point cut this back, but all these roots here are connected to the base here in the back. So this will be part of the root ball. But planting like this, something like this, should work. Let's get it into a pot. Of course, This side is also very interesting but hard to show, and you don't see the roots all that much. But that's for later. I'm first going to plant it up and see how it responds over the next year or so. Now, showing what I do exactly is always a little bit difficult. I did prune the roots on the bottom, so I can just push this down on the substrate in the angle that I roughly want it to be. And keep in mind, right, this tree is still very wobbly and the wiring is not very good. It is not going to be in the final position, probably this repot, but it aids. And now with these wires I need to make sure that they go over heavy roots. Here there's a heavy root. Pull it tight. Very difficult angle. And I can't of course pull it tight. Silly me. Because these are not individual wires. Now here this sits with the wire over a heavy root, holding it down and in place. Let's make sure it really stays there. And now I can take this other side and I have a little bit of tubing, so not to damage the tree too much. And I slide that over the wire. And this is just rubber tubing, right? Has a little bit of give, and then for the duration that this is wired in the pot, I can just pull this here around this main trunk. And that way hold this side. And then on this side I'll give it a gentle squeeze, and on the other side I'll do the final tightening. That's pretty stable. And now of course the rest of the stability also comes from the substrate. In the next 2-3 weeks it will root itself in place. Because I took so much of the inner substrate out, it is really important to really use a chopstick and gently move the roots sideways so that new substrate can fall in between the roots. And I do this in layers. So I've added a little bit now here on this side, then I'll add a little bit more, make sure that all the roots go into the pot. Where is not all that important at this stage, that's really for later development. Right now it just needs to go all below the substrate. Let's add some more and then I'll just continue chopsticking. Look here, you can see the root hollow, all the substrate just needs to come in. And of course after compacting and filling it up, it is time to water the tree. And then it just goes into a spot where it was. I protected a little bit against the wind because it is not as stable as it was before. Important now is watering it well, 2-3 times over maybe half an hour, so that all the substrate gets really wet. This will compact the substrate a little bit more. You can see I filled it to the rim. I think that after watering for a few times and waiting for a day or two, it will have compressed by, well, maybe 1/4 of an inch, half a centimeter. And over the course of the season I expect this to compact even more. That's also why I've put so much substrate in. And you can see I've again covered the nebari. I really want this tree to stay humid as much as possible, and all this trunk was all in the ground beforehand. So it needs to get used a little bit again to being exposed to the sun. I hope this helped in what to do when you get a new tree. Don't just assume everything under the ground is as you expect it to be. Repot. For this tree it means that I'm not going to do any styling over winter. I might do a little bit of pruning, but not all that much. This first needs to root into this pot. And then in early spring I'll check and see how well this has responded, whether I can continue with the tree or whether I'm just going to give it another half a year and do all the styling work next fall. Get it into a good pot, know the roots, know whether the position is right, and only then consider styling. That is unfortunately the best way to go about. Or you do the styling if you do know what the nebari looks like, and then you repot a year later. But always leave a little bit of space between the two. This was Jelle, growing bonsai. Do you want to know more about growing junipers? Have a look there. If you want to know more about general beginning bonsai, maybe just look at my latest video. If you're not subscribed, do that now, and otherwise, see you next time.